The law of the prophets primarily is a window onto this story. You could say the law and the prophets are a little bit like maybe Match of the Day. Match of the Day, you know, the programme on the BBC, often on a Saturday night, which gives highlights of the football matches that have happened that day. You see, the highlights of the matches themselves are a bit like the history books. Many history books in the Old Testament, books like Exodus and Joshua and Ruth and the Kings and Samuel and Chronicles, they're history books and they're like highlights of the matches. They help us see what's life actually like lived in this story. We may get a snapshot on somebody like Abel, a good man, a farmer who just wants to live well, and one day he's called into the field by his brother, and unexpectedly out of nowhere his brother kills him. That's a story of a person in this whole narrative of where a world has been invaded by an evil force, a curse, or the evil one, or hostility, or greed, or sin. There's many different terms for it. That's a snapshot of one person's life. Another snapshot could be something like Sarah, the wife of Abraham, a rich and successful businessman, almost like a man self-made. And she watches her husband achieving and making so much prosperity for them as a family. And year after year, she looks and thinks the one thing I'm meant to do is to provide an heir, is to produce a child. And each year her heart must sink. And you watch bitterness grow. The narrative is just really just lays it out. It's like highlights of the player who's in a great team, but gradually each time they miss that open goal, they miss that tackle, they cause problems. So you're like watching thinking, oh, there's a narrative of a life. Or you could even choose something like Samson. Samson, a fascinating individual that is a snapshot in the book of Judges on him. And Samson plays for a team who is a losing team. And he's a wild and crazy man who does all kinds of things you'd never expect somebody to do. But there's moments, there's flickers of absolute genius. You know, maybe he wins you see a highlights of him winning an extraordinary goal to win a match that should have been lost. And Samson, you watch his narrative and his devotion as a Nazarite to God begins to fade. And at the end of his life, he's had his hair cut off and he's in prison and it feels like, oh, his career's over, he's done. And then one last moment of utter genius. And yet even Samson, at the end of his life, he dies. And the truth is that his team, Israel, are still in the plight that they were. And this church, this is really a snapshot of the whole of this law and the prophets, this story of Samson. Moments, flickers of hope, of deliverance, of delight, of winning, flickers of that. But the truth is, it's a story really of failure. It's the story really of the team not winning, of them being losing under the power of the curse. And the pundits are like the law. The pundits are like the instructions given by God to say, this is how to do life well in the midst of this ongoing story of battle. The pundits sit there and explain, oh, this is what they should have done, or that's what they should have done. That's like the law that's given. The Ten Commandments, the law of Moses, mainly in Exodus, but also repeated and in Deuteronomy, and you also see it in the book of Leviticus. Now, you don't only get the pundits talking about the law, but at times you also get the pundits talking about the season. Maybe a manager will talk about the season, what their hopes are for where they'll end in the season. We're trying to avoid relegation, or we're trying to get into Europe, trying to qualify for Europe this season. Maybe we're even trying to win the title. And the story, as all good stories, has an element of hope. You look forward to a moment in the future. And you have also moments where you're explained, look, this is where we are in the season right now. And that explanation that the pundits give, or maybe the managers give, or some players give, that is like the prophetic. It's like the prophetic declarations. And many, many books are prophetic books in the Old Testament. If you said anything, that it's a story, but it's a story that's constantly looking to its end. The law and the prophets is constantly looking beyond itself to say one day God will fix this. One day the power of the curse, one day the power of the evil one, one day sin will be defeated. Law and the prophets is a story that constantly looks to the end, to the day when God will fix things and sort out this problem that always causes them to lose. The final type of literature we see in the law of the prophets, all of which comes under that title, is the wisdom literature. The wisdom literature is like the bloggers and the tweeters, the armchair pundits who sit there and they look at what's going on the pitch and they're like, this really, and they're really that, and oh, it's so meaningless when this happens. And then there's other guys who say, oh, this is, if you do this, then you'll win the game, and if you change your tactics like that, then you'll do well. And somebody says, no, and that's the wisdom literature. It's like the self-analysis of life lived in this story. And what we find is that Jesus comes and he says he's come to fulfill this law and the prophets. He says basically, look, I've not come to get rid of match of the day. I've not come to stop you playing football. I've actually come to enable you to join in with the game. All of you, you can join in with this game.